The good news, 2020 is officially behind us. But unfortunately, I got some really bad news, and I really don't know how to tell it. I think we should just get to it and figure it out together. You know what's next. Welcome. Another episode of IBF On Demand. First one of 2021. I'm your not so humble but very passionate host, Eric Wilson. You can find me at eric@ibf.org. Reach out to me at eric@ibf.org. We do have a sponsor for this. Back for season number 3. Big round of applause, Arkiva. Thank you for coming back and sponsoring this. If you haven't checked them out now, I highly recommend your one plan S&OP software solution. Thank Arkiva for being on board and check them out. They're a great sponsor now, starting into season number 3 of these podcasts. And you are back as well. This is a community. Continue to like, share, subscribe. Over the past year, we've had over 2,000 subscribers join, over 50,000 views, over 500,000 minutes of viewing and listening to this episode, these podcasts. Thanks, Mom, for listening. And you shared these over 1,000 times in 2020. That's 2020. We're starting to 2021 now. Continue. Keep it up. Watching these, liking them, sharing them. And if you haven't, for some unknown reason, subscribe. Either on YouTube, Spotify, Apple, wherever you're getting your podcast, wherever you're watching them, subscribe and like them and comment. And personally, for a great 2020 and all the success we had, I want to thank you for being part of it. I know we had enough bad news in 2020 last year. We had enough bad news. But what do you do when you're the person that has to deliver that bad news? Because I'll guarantee you, something else is going to happen in the future with your organization, what you're forecasting. There's going to be another downturn. There's going to be lost sales. There's going to be new competition that comes on. There's going to be bad news. There's going to be a time when you're going to, as a forecaster, have to deliver that bad news. And nobody likes that bad news. And guess what? Sometimes they want to shoot the messenger. And it's difficult to hear. And especially when you're the messenger, it's even more difficult. And guess what, though? Unfortunately, that bad news is going to be part of your job as a forecaster to deliver. So I wanted to have this podcast. Exactly how do we deliver that bad news? I went back, and there's some great articles on this. And a few of the articles are by a gentleman named Larry Lapid. Has some phenomenal articles on this subject. So I wanted to bring him in and talk about exactly delivering that bad news. Dr. Larry Lapid has extensive experience in industry, consulting, business research, and academia, as well as a broad range of forecasting, planning, and supply chain experience. He's a graduate from Wharton School with a PhD in operations. He's had 7 years of vice president, supply chain, and analyst at AMR, over 20 years research and teaching at MIT. He is a recipient of the 2012 inaugural Lifetime Achievement in Business Forecasting Planning Award from IBF, and he's currently an advisory board member of the Institute of Business Forecasting as well. Said he has a couple great articles. Help me welcome Larry. So thank you, Larry, for joining us today. I said, you actually have a couple of great articles on this topic. So the reason I wanted to bring it, they're in the Journal of Business Forecasting. Invite everybody to go back and check it. Matter of fact, I think we'll just put the links down below. You can find those articles you can do. But you have some experience, I think, in delivering bad news, and wrote a couple great articles about that. You want to share a little bit about that, what your kind of the impetus behind those articles were?
Sure. I've been writing for the Journal of Business Forecasting since 1997. I go pretty far back. And so I've got a lot of articles that talked about different topics along the way. Way back in 2001, which is when I originally wrote this first article, I wrote about forecasting down turns, either going up or down. And it's based upon, my experiences at a company where, we were in a high-tech company, right? And basically, we always grew. And then all of a sudden, the computer equipment sales dropped, and that impacted our service sales. And I forecasted a turnaround. I went from going to forecast the prior year 15%, which was right on, to zero growth. And that meant a lot to the organization because they were used to growth. So
yeah, so I'm sure they loved hearing that news then.
Oh, yeah.
No problem.
They love you. You love giving good news. It's really fun. Doing forecasting is fun when things are going up. But as soon as you get a downturn or a turn, either up, even up or down, but certainly down, now you're the harbinger of bad news, and you don't want to kill them. Their tendency is to kill the messenger, right?
Yeah, they want to shoot the messenger at that point. Yes.
Oh yeah, I don't want to hear this news, right? And so I also wrote about that. So the first issue was, let's talk about the forecasting that downturn when you can. Of course, it's very difficult to do, but when you can, at least let's talk about it because it may happen and it has happened. So now we have to worry about that over the future. And also, we want to help people hopefully forecast for upturns eventually, right? When it turns from down to up. The second article was written in 2015, but actually took place in the late 1980s when I was at this computer company. But it took me time to write it. It's one of these things. You went through such a bad year that year. I went through such a bad year that year. I was young, right? I'm a little old. I could go through the year now, but when I was young, it was like a lot harder to do it. And I had all these executives relying, and I was positioned. Well, everything I said, they believed because I already proved myself to be a successful forecaster. That helped me out. But I was dealing with an environment. Nobody wanted to hear this message because, promotions depended on it. Salary increases depended on it. Layoffs depended on it. And basically, we were in an environment where we were constantly growing double digits, and we weren't going to anymore. We were going to be flat, basically. And that's what was a real position. So the second article was written in 2015, but I felt was relevant today as well, because we have forecasters out there and planners who now have to deal with an environment where they're dealing with bad news. They're giving bad news. I've had at least one conversation with somebody, one of our older members in the IBF, who I talked to maybe 7-8 years ago, who ran into this at his company, and he was on the verge of getting fired because he was constantly fighting with the sales guys. This is where it comes down. It becomes a fight between the salespeople and you because their job is to generate sales. And when you tell them they're not going to generate any growth, they take, they don't believe you right away, right? Yeah, you must have some experiences with that yourself. So anyway, that's the kind of the reason why I wrote these things, right?
Yeah, definitely. I got experience, and I think a lot of our audience has experience of this as well. They see what's coming. They see the numbers and they know what's going to happen, but but nobody wants to hear it inside the organization. And to that, your defense, the end of your article, you were vindicated by your senior vice president, said you were the only one that brought the news to the table. So, to your credit, you were the one person. So to the planners out there though, that are now looking to be able to provide that bad news, you mentioned sales and marketing. They're sometimes working against it. They have quotas, or they're optimistic, or, they have, it's not in their best interest to see a downturn coming. So they may be working not intentionally against you, but they are giving a different message inside the organization. How do you work on building that bridge to the CEO or CFO?
Yeah, it's a credibility thing. But I think the first thing that happens is you have to identify why the downturn happened. Right? Or why it will be happening. In other words, if you're forecasting a downturn, or if it happened already, you got to at least know what caused it, right? And, and that's a big issue. And that gets into how do you model downturns, right? And upturns. I don't talk about upturns much in this article because unfortunately we're dealing with kind of an environment where we have to give bad news. But,
people don't mind hearing the good news. You want to come with, hey, we're going to see 20% lift. People don't mind hearing that. It's when you're going to say we're going to go 20% down is when you kind of catch their attention.
Right. So let's take COVID-19. Nobody forecasted that first of all, whoever thought it was going to get as big as it is, and then have these lockdowns where we're locking down the economy, right? We're stopping the economy from happening. We couldn't have forecasted it, but given that it happened, we should know the impact of it on our future demand, right? So the first thing we have to do is build some models around, even if we haven't yet seen the downturn, if we're forecasting it, or if we've seen it already, we do have to understand why it happened. And given that understanding, we then have to model how we're going to get out of it, or how we're going to, move from it, etc. And so in that first article, I talked about what's called leading indicators. What are indicators that this might happen? It's not statistics anymore. It's more about understanding the basic consumer behavior in terms of adopting the demand for your product or not adopting demand for your product, whatever the case may be. And then in the first article, I also talked about getting organizational buy-in, okay? So I gave people advice on 3 things. Again, it was going back to 2001. One was stick to your guns. What did I mean that? Is you have to create the model, whatever it is, and then you have to stick to it. And you have to be very clear. And what I always talk about when you're dealing with a forecast, what is it comprised of? It's 3 things: facts, figures, and assumptions. Facts are things like that, certainly data and what happened, right? That's facts, right? This is what happened over time. Let's say we're looking at a 3-year history or something. These are the facts, right? Of what we did, what we promoted, what we didn't promote, whatever the case may be. Then there's figures. Taking that and visualizing it, and believe it or not, visualization is extremely important in selling any model. I remember when I went down one time to Mexico to train some grad students in forecasting down there, and we had them do a little exercise in forecasting before we got there, and they all used Solver to do minimum least squared error.
Yeah.
Right?
I remember those days, yes.
Yeah, right. So they use Solver, which is the NLP thing, right? So they did it, but they never showed a picture of the forecast versus the actual history of the product, right?
Yeah.
And so when I had them do that, they had these trends in the demand, like going up, right? But the forecast was like almost zero because that was the best fit.
Best fit, not the best model, but it's the best fit.
Right. And so what I do that is visualization. It gives us what I call face validity. The model may be valid in terms of fitting to what's going on, but the face validity says it satisfies the visualization, which is if I put a chart out there and I show the actual demand and the forecast demand, I know right away it was a stupid model, right? And that's what happened to these students. They were shocked. They had worked up the least squared regression, right? I said, no, you need face validity as well in a business environment because you have to sell your forecast. So that's the second component. You got to have visualizations that make it very clear to people what's going on. And then the third thing, is facts, figures, and then the tricky thing is assumptions.
Yeah.
Don't hide your assumptions. Make them very visible because it's going to be important when you get to that. So you're going to stick to those 3 things, right? So that's stick to your guns, right? Force others to justify the forecast. Okay, go ahead.
Oh, no, I would say I agree 100%. I mean, your facts, figures, assumptions, that's what you got to present. I mean, taking one quick step back, what you're talking about, those models that you were using as well, the decomposition model, what was the other one for marketing, what you called it, type situation? Adoption model. I mean, got something very similar in machine learning models that can look at, different types of marketing campaigns. It's almost a trial and error type of models there because that's what you're doing. You're training models is what you're doing. I would kind of put all those into a bucket called predictive analytics, which is really what we're seeing, because of COVID and people adopting now. When they're looking at new and different types of data, they're trying to look at external sources. You mentioned the consumer demand, consumer sentiment, getting closer to that as well, bringing those variables in, looking at new ways of modeling now as well, and trying to find those leading indicators and being more forward-looking. That's in essence is predictive analytics, and that's a lot of what you're talking about. Putting a label on it is that predictive analytics is what we're seeing companies go to going forward. So I think those are the type of modeling. The time series modeling isn't going to work as well when you don't have your histories isn't representative of tomorrow. So you're really going to have to go to these new forms of modeling then at that point. Real quick, I think we only have time for one or two more questions. Real quick, you mentioned in the delivering, that bad news. It hit budgets. It hit people's lives. I had the experience one time when I had to deliver, a new forecast, knowing it was going to result in layoffs. That's hard to do sometimes, understanding that as your position. How do you approach that from the human side or the professional side of it? How do you do that when your job as your forecaster to deliver that bad news that it's going to impact real people and dollars and everything in an organization?
Well, the first thing you got to realize is, I was at a company for like 7-8 years. I knew everybody. They were all my friends. They constantly would ask me, how's the business doing? What are you forecasting, right? So I used to have a relationship with everybody in the company, including the senior VP who ran everything. He trusted only me, right? Because I was so successful as a forecaster at that point. And so the first thing you're going to get is people aren't going to want to talk to you anymore. I called it a political setting. You're in a political environment now where things are going bad. People know that there may be layoffs. They know that they may not get their pay raises. They may not get their promotions next year. And you're telling them you still continue. So they ask you a couple times and then they don't want to ask you anymore because you're at a harbinger of bad news. But you have to stick to your guns, right? That's the key. Again, I call it, in the second article, I called it do opinionless forecasting. Don't have any opinions. Again, facts, figures, assumptions, be very open about all of it. Don't hide anything, and therefore don't create any really models that are so sophisticated you can't explain them. They have to be face valid, not just valid, but face valid, right? So opinionless forecasting. You want to give good news to people, so don't give them just good news because you want them to feel better, right?
Yeah.
Including your boss or his boss or whatever. You have to stick to what you're not opinionless. It's not opinion. It's facts, figures, and assumptions. The second thing is you should be providing an estimate of forecast accuracy. Most forecasters hate providing that because it's too big. So we hide it. We just give them a number. No, 1 point doesn't count. In order for people to use your forecast, they've got to know what's called a risk profile or some kind of profile of uncertainty as to how uncertain is this forecast, right? Yes, it's your best forecast you can come up with, but we need it. We need to know if it's plus or minus 10%. So when we put inventory in place, production in place, we know that could happen, right? So the second thing was to provide an estimate of forecast accuracy, which most forecasters at that time didn't provide. I don't even know if they do today.
Even if it's 30% plus or minus, they need to know that.
Right. And the third one was be professional. And what did I mean by that? Is act professionally. Don't get emotional about things. This is about the facts, figures, and numbers. If somebody's disputing you about something, usually it's sales and marketing. I always say, assume your forecast is innocent until proven guilty by them. And the only way they can do that is they don't believe a fact, they don't believe the figure's right, and they don't believe your assumption. And be open on all of those things to defending it. You have to defend the forecast and the plan based upon what you know, not your opinion. Don't give any opinions, period. You should be out of opinions at all, right? And then the last one is stay out of politics, because what happens is, you want to please the senior VP or you want to please the CEO if you're talking to the CEO. You just have to, in order to be professional, you got to stay out of politics. I know they're your friends. These are people you love and you've been with a long time. You see them all the time. You have lunch with them. That's the only way you could do it. I mean, you can't get involved with politics because guess what? The political things are all going to be happening at the high level sales and marketing level are going to be the people who are going to fight it the most. You can't worry about that. They'll probably be gone anyway. If they don't do well, if the company's not doing well, the executives are going. The forecasting organization, the planning organizations, they stay. The executives, they come and go, right? So don't play politics because if you play politics, when they go, you go, right? So you have to keep your job. So your job is to be the most credible possible and professional, and that's the way you have to approach it. And it really has to do with, you got bad news, but hey, I'm not going to get emotional about it.
So, I mean, fantastic advice. And I mean, what I heard is don't deliver fake news and stay out of politics.
Right. Yeah, that's a new term, fake news. I didn't put that in this.
That's what I heard. Avoid fake news and stay out of politics. That's what I heard. I mean, no, that was fantastic advice. I mean, there was a lot packed in there, but I hope everybody goes back and listens to this podcast 2 or 3 times and kind of puts it, pieces us apart, because there was a lot of great information you just delivered there. Hey, I only got time for about 30 more seconds, so it's going to have to be a quick answer from you. But you mentioned you were there for 7 years. When I had to deliver the news, bad news, knowing it was going to impact people, I was there for 10 years. We got people listening to this podcast right now that are new to a job. And they're just coming in. They're looking at 2021. Everybody wants this, hey, we're going to uptick. They're the ones going to have to deliver the news. They've been there for 6 months now. And they got to go to the CFO or CEO. And they're a little bit nervous about having to, not, their job. They haven't been there that long. What's your advice, your parting words for that person just into this job? I said, you only got about 30 seconds. But how do they deliver the bad news to their bosses or senior leadership?
Yeah, well, you got to remember the reaction is always going to be, no, we don't believe it. And so then you have to walk them through a very simple approach to facts, figures, and assumptions, and lay out exactly what you assumed, and let them deal with the assumptions, facts, and figures that they don't believe, all right? Keep the conversation there, because that's what your value add was, is to take the facts, figures, and assumptions and create a forecast and a plan, right? Yeah. If you go any further and give your opinion, like I said, you're going to be in trouble, especially if you're new. I had credibility, so I could give an opinion. They probably would believe me, but to be professional, I shouldn't be giving an opinion, period. I should be neutral. My forecast and plan is always a sanity check against all these things. I'll just give you a parting anecdote. I had to give a forecasting model to a CEO, and he asked me, how am I going to use this model? And I said, well, assume you have all your executives in the room. You have to make a decision on it. This happened to be a location decision. I said, call the forecasting model George. He's another one of the executives, kind of. And he has an opinion. He has a view that's unbiased, based on data, based on facts, based on figures and assumptions. George has no agenda, right? And basically the forecasting planner has no agenda. We should have no agenda, especially if you do. You have no agenda, right? Your agenda is to just put best forecast in place and plan in place. And then the CEO recognizes, oh yeah, my marketing guy is going to have an agenda, right? The sales guy is going to have an agenda. The operations guy is going to have an agenda. The logistics guys are going to have an agenda. Finance guys are going to have an agenda. Everybody's going to have their agenda that they want to see, especially growth. Right? They're going to want to see growth. Nobody wants to accept decline, right? But sometimes you have to. And so that's what I told the CEO. I said, just assume that this particular model, this particular forecast is unbiased. And the only thing you could deal with is, what is it based on? And do you have some problem with what it's based on? Again, innocent until proven guilty, right? And based upon one of those 3 things, right?
There you go. I want to thank you very much, Larry. I mean, fantastic interview. I wish we had more time. I'm sure we could keep going for another 20 minutes talking about this. I hope people check out your article and look forward to the next article you got about uncertainty coming as well. So I want to thank you very much, Larry.
Oh, well, thanks for inviting me, Eric.
Have a good new year.
You too. Hopefully a better year, right?
Yeah, hopefully a better year. So talk at you soon.
Take care. Thanks.
Bye.
Bye.
So it was a good interview we just had with Larry, and it had a lot of practical advice. I said, you want to rewind that a few times and listen to some of the things he said. Just expanding on it a little bit, doing the research for this podcast, I looked at some different articles, and I found a great article from Psychology Today back in 2018 that gave actually advice on how to delivering bad news. And it gave 4 things it recommends in delivering bad news. And I thought it's applicable to what we're doing and talking about today. The 4 pieces of advice they gave was, number 1, prepare for the conversation. You can't just wing it. You need to be prepared for the conversation you're going to have, especially if you're delivering bad news. What to say, how they're going to react to it, who else is going to be, who the audience is. Understand those aspects of it. Prepare for that conversation. And one of the best way you can prepare for it, and you heard Larry mention this as well, is with facts. come with those facts. Understand the facts, the figures, the assumptions that you're bringing to the table. Understand the gaps and the potential whys. Understand those assumptions that you have and the gaps in what you're presenting and the facts and the figures and what questions may come from it. So number one, prepare for that conversation. Number two, remind yourself and a lot of times others why it's necessary to have this honest conversation and why you're delivering this information. A lot of times if you remind yourself of why you're doing it, you feel justified in delivering the bad news. And as far as why you're doing it and for the other's sake of why you're doing it, guess what? At some point, most likely, as an organization, you're going to have to pay the piper at some point. I've seen too many organizations that get caught in this spiral of kicking the can down the road and not facing the truth of what is occurring now and what's going to occur in the future. And at some point, it occurs. Or at some point, you can't keep pushing those budgets down the down the road through the year. At some point, you have to pay the piper. If bad news is real, you're going to have to face the truth eventually. And not making a decision is going to be even worse going down if you just wait. And that's the other thing. When you remind yourself why you're doing this, the other thing you need to remind yourself is you're not a lot of times making the decision. You're providing the data. You're providing the insights. You're providing the information so people can make a informed decision that can then maybe prevent something from occurring in the future as well. So your job is not making the decision. You're opinionless, is what Larry said. It's an opinionless. You're coming with facts, figures, assumptions, and allowing others to make the decision. That's your job. He mentioned to stay clear of politics, and I would also say stay clear of bias as well. Remind yourself why you're doing it, have an honest conversation, and present an honest, non-political, unbiased information so others can make a decision, because eventually somebody will have to pay that piper. Number 3 on Psychology Today's 2018, How to Deliver Bad News, is give them knowledge. You're providing that information so they can be informed now instead of after the fact. Explain it with data. Provide an estimate and range of error. Yes, it's one of the 7 principles of business forecasting, demand planning. Provide an estimate of error. That's what we need to start doing. Because guess what? You don't have all the information, but you can prevent. Here's the facts. Here's my estimate of error, or here's the range of a forecast, or the probability of these features impacting this forecast. Explain it with data, explain it with estimates of the uncertainty. Let them know the factors that went into it. That's key as well. There's assumptions that did go into this. There's assumptions that that you assume. Let them know what you know. Let them know what we're assuming. Let them know the factors that went into it. What do we know now that's the reason this is a downturn or going to be bad news that we didn't know a week ago? Let them know the factors that went into it. And a cautionary is, don't over-explain it though. Be direct, be to the point, and don't over-explain it. You don't need to come with every single data point and all this information, which is, I get it. When you want to deliver bad news, you want to give them everything. You don't always need to give them everything. Give them what is relevant. Be direct, be to the point, give them what is relevant, and give them enough to let them know that this is well thought out. This is what they need to know to make that decision with. So that was number 3. Number 4 in delivering bad news is empathize and create spaces for emotions. Yes, this is in the business world as well. This is with you with forecasting as well. You have to respect other sales. You're going to impact people's lives maybe with this information. You're going to impact the business with this information. Just because we're in the business world does not mean we're not human. empathy is something that we're going to have to tap into every now and then as a forecaster. Creating those spaces for emotions, yes, I know there's no crying in S&OP. I get that. But we can allow for questions. We can allow for dissent. We can allow for time to have discussions about what we're talking about. We can allow for people to have opinions that maybe disagree with what we have and understand their facts, their figures, and their assumptions that went into it. Ultimately, what we're trying to do when I mentioned that we're empathizing and creating this space of emotions is we're working on those critical three C's of demand planning, forecasting, predictive analytics. The three C's: consensus, collaboration, and communication. We can't, even more important when we're trying to deliver those bad news, we need to go back to those three C's. We're building consensus. We're listening. We're trying to come to a consensus here. It's collaboration. It's not just you thinking this is going to happen. We came to a consensus, and through collaboration, we came to this decision that is made. And communication. Be direct. Don't back down. Communicate what you think is going to happen. Be transparent as well in this information. That is what got us through. A lot of these companies got us through the pandemic of 2020 and part of 2021. Hopefully it's coming over soon. But it's those three C's. And that was allowed us to really build a good forecast going forward. Collaboration, consensus, and that communication, being transparent. Those are the four things that I think were applicable to what we can do and help delivering. I said Larry had a lot of great information in his. Hope you check out his, rewind, check out what he had to say as well. I do have a little bit more bad news. And the bad news is this episode has come to an end. But the good news is we're just starting 2021. We got a great sponsor in Arkiva sponsoring us for another season here. They're going to take us into the first half of 2021 and maybe beyond that. We got great base here. We're going to continue to grow. So we're just starting 2021, and it's going to be even better year. So the bad news is this episode's over, but we've got a lot more coming in the future. My name is Eric Wilson. Find me at eric@ibf.org. That's eric@ibf.org. I mentioned Arkiva, your one-plan S&OP software solution. They're sponsor for this podcast and continuing on to 2021. Mentioned you. Consider IBF becoming a member if you're already not. Like, share, subscribe these as well. Together, we're just one big happy family, and I want you to join this family. Do want to mention one other thing quickly in parting, because I'm going to mention this in every podcast. You're going to get sick of hearing this, but I do have a new book coming out today as I'm recording this, Predictive Analytics for Business Forecasting and Planning. You can order your copy today, ibf.org/books. Find my book there. I need to feed my family this year, so you have to buy my book so I can feed my family in 2021. That's the goal. So check out my book, buy my book, check out the past podcast, and last parting advice for 2021, don't forget, wash your hands.